Hello, it's Jim Hutchens for the Jerusalem Connections Truth Report for this week. Last week in Iran, the capital city, Tehran, there was a conference held, a conference entitled the Second New Horizon Conference. It was basically a conference that was conducted to criticize Israel. Some of the observers there said it was an anti-Semitic hate fest. And lo and behold, who is there but the Reverend Dr. Stephen Sizer. Dr. Sizer is a clergyman in the Church of England, and he has been vehement, vitriolic in his criticism of Israel, anti-Semitic in his criticism of Israel, and likewise as energetic for his support for the Palestinians. And we have gone through this book of Romans 9 through 11 to speak to the likes of Dr. Stephen Sizer. And I think it's important that if you take the Romans 9 through 11 at face value as what it literally says, it proves the lie to Palestinian replacement theology. And that's what Dr. Sizer and his cohorts, Dr. Burge, Gary Burge from Wheaton College, there are others, we've named some of them over time. But this is the response that God gives to those who would say that the Palestinians now have the right to the land as opposed to the Jews, as it was promised to Abraham and his descendants. We're looking at Romans 9 through 11. We're in chapter 11. Let me read just the passage that we looked at last week, verse 17. The apostle says, if some of the branches have been broken off, the Jews that have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap of the olive fruit, do not boast over these branches. Now, be aware of what the symbolism is speaking of here. The root refers to the patriarchs, the covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the root. Now, there were branches that came out of that root. And those who are believing branches are included into the Israel of God. Now, God, in His grace, has reached out to the Gentile world and engrafted those who believe in Jesus into this Israel of God. This is not the church. Be aware that this passage is not speaking of the church. The term church is not used. I mentioned this before. It's not used until Romans chapter 16, where it refers to Phoebe as a deaconess in the church at Centuria. Church should be translated congregation or assembly. But the people of God, the Israel of God, that term incidentally is used in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 16, referring to the believing component of Israel, which is made up of believing Jews and believing Gentiles. He goes on to say in verse 19, you will say then, branches, that is, Jews, were broken off so that I could be grafted in. They were broken off so that Gentiles could be brought in. Gentile believers in Jesus could be grafted in. Granted, but they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but be afraid. I'm going to deal with some of these do not phrases here next week. Do not be arrogant, but be afraid, for if God did not spare the natural branches, He will not spare you either. Much of church history has been dominated by an arrogance that says that the church has now replaced Israel as the covenant people of God. That's not true. If anything, it is Israel has been expanded. Our understanding of the Israel of God has been expanded and extended to include Gentiles who are believers in Jesus. So it's important to take this passage at face value and understand the symbolism that is being referred to, and do not be arrogant. That's the message to Gentile believers. Do not be arrogant, but be afraid, for if God did not spare the natural branches, He will not spare you either. And that's the truth.